Herzlich willkommen, bienvenidos, bienvenue, benvenuti, hello, welcome.
Hello, benvenuti. Welcome one and all to the 6th keynote of our project, Young Influencers for Ecological Change. Now we'll be doing this entirely in Spanish with simultaneous interpretation into English. As you know, the 4 of the 7 countries in our project, the Spanish is spoken. For this reason, of course, we needed to do something entirely in Spanish, particularly because today we have Antoni Gutierrez-Rubí as our keynote speaker. Welcome. He's an expert in communication and political consultancy all over the Latin American world. He lives in Barcelona, i.e. near to the Goethe-Institut, but you travel a lot around Latin America. You have your consulting agency, of which you are director. You have offices in 9 countries, I believe, in Latin America. And in addition to this, you're also someone who follows current politics very, very closely. We read your commentaries in prestigious newspapers like El País, El Periódico, La Vanguardia, but also Latin American publications. And something which we're interested in particularly is you're author of a very interesting book. Don't know whether you can see the book itself on the screen. The book is called Artism, the Power of Artistic Language for Political Activism. Here we have a copy of it. It's a very good book. It's a marvelous book, in fact. It's not yet been translated into other languages, but those of you who do speak and understand Spanish, well, I recommend it to you thoroughly. And we'd like to share the content of this book with you this evening, because after this century in which, since we've been carrying out the keynote lectures, environmental psychology, storytelling, and other things, how, in order to achieve your aims based on values, objectives, and actions, we've also learned how to organize international campaigns. Now, as the Goethe-Institut, the cherry on the icing would be to involve artistic languages and artistic methods in order to be visible and heard in a world in which we have such a welter of information. Now, it's a good idea to have an inspiring language and more original language. In addition to this, I can also say from my experience, it's much more interesting and entertaining if you really open up your mind and don't carry out a dry campaign, which just talking about slogans, but a campaign which broadens out and has creative language incorporated into it. Now, as always, we're going to have a presentation, some 30 or 40 minutes long keynote lecture. We don't need to have a break because, of course, Monica Murphy and John Matthews, our interpreters, take turns. And so after Antoni Gutierrez-Rubí's keynote lecture, we will ask you for your input via the chat. And you can talk about anything you like. Antoni Gutierrez-Rubí, welcome once more. So it's all yours. And we're delighted to listen to you and see you. Thank you very much for the invitation. Can you hear me? I hope you can. I'm very happy that you've invited me to give this keynote lecture. I'd like to thank our interpreters on the work they're going to do. I shall try and speak slowly so that they can follow me properly without problems. I'm going to share my screen with you, by the way. And once we have it on screen, on your screen, I'll start. Are we okay? Thank you. Yes, we can see. Fine, everything's fine. Thank you. Now, today's session has been entitled Artism, how to join to merge ecology and artistic activism. That's the title. I've prepared 3 kinds of resources. This presentation, which I'm going to give orally today for you. I put the finishing touches to it this morning, but I did want to introduce some changes to it. Then there's the book, which Bettina has talked about, which is this. Unfortunately, I can't give it to you as a gift to each and every one of you. But anyway, I have asked the publishing house to publish a chapter, a free chapter, which I will be able to share. I've looked for one chapter, which seems to be an important chapter in the book, and you will have it. If you want to, of course, if you want to buy the book, so much the better. I've also prepared a resource guide, a sort of toolkit to know more about, well, of course, independently of the illustrated presentation. I'll also give you many, many links and a great deal of material you can look at for yourself. What are we going to be talking about today? Well, first of all, 4 things mainly. The first of them is, why do I believe that in political activism, we are in the era of causes and not political castes? Why does this generate a new role, a new kind of political activism, social activism too? Why do the new artistic languages, why are they especially useful and effective for political and social activism? And fourthly, I shall give you some examples of activism and ecology using 5 kinds of different languages, so that I hope they will inspire you. Now, in the document, which further resources of the complements, I present you very many links to my website, where we will have a special section about artivism, which I hope will be particularly useful to you. Now, without further ado, point number 1, the era of causes. In 2008 financial crisis, in addition, of course, to a tremendous amount of upset in society about the role of the regulator and political vigilance in the financial system, it also, in this financial crisis, we also saw 2 elements which have generated a new political cause-related political activism. First of all, in 2008, at the beginning of the digital communication and social networks. Now, Google, since 1990, was born in 1998, but Facebook, 2005, 2006, Twitter, 2006, 2007, and others later on. And so the financial crisis comes at a time when many, many social movements used technology as a means of coordinating themselves and, of course, as political activism. The second point, the second cause, this financial crisis also coincided with a tremendous disappointment and tremendous frustration, too, on the part vis-a-vis the regulatory power of the regulators, of their surveillance power, because of the combination of both things, because of frustration and disappointment for the financial system and the enormous connectivity of the vanguards and social movements via technology. During the decade, or the last decade rather, we saw a growth of very important movements of activism, social and political activism, that is, which completely outstripped the streets, overflowed from the street. It overflowed the structures and the seams, so to speak, and the institutions and political institutions too. It completely overwhelmed them. It's an entire, very important area. Here we see some of the images of the shots of this decade, but it came to an end in 2019, before the pandemic. Of course, this is pre-pandemic, and 2019, that was the year as the year of protests. Never had we had as many protests at the same time all over the world, both in the East and the West, North and South, all in all kinds of political systems. And all these demonstrations talk about a broken system, an insufficient democratic institutionalization of a democratic deficit, of fatigue in democracy, and with a tremendous disappointment or mistrust. Now, these crises and these movements, as I said before, were present all over the world, in all countries, very different countries in themselves, and they affected more than 110 countries. We had protests and demonstrations against democratic governments, and sometimes in authoritarian governments too, and some of them were related later on with something which came along during the pandemic. This is spectacular decade of tremendous activism where protest and the public denunciation has not actually replaced the democratic process of protesting in a democratic way with a vote to chastise or to reward different political parties. But this was something which in our democracies, our democratic systems in those countries where there is a democracy, only offer this choice every 4 years or every 5 years, depending on the democratic system in existence. But for many, many people, and for many sectors, particularly for younger people, well, this decision every 4 or 5 years was insufficient to pick up the desire for change or for the denunciations or complaints of people when people were unsatisfied with democracy. Of course, this decade, as I said before, was regarded as the decade of the most important decade vis-a-vis protests all over the world. And we have many, many studies which document them and provide us with a great deal of information vis-a-vis this very, very strong, because of the failure of political systems in democracies. Now, within the category of denunciations and protests and demonstrations of social justice, well, those which are related to climate change have really come to the forefront. And so for the generation, for the millennials and for the centennials, they've been tremendous protagonists. These political forces have taken on tremendous protagonism. In this previous picture you saw before, and in many of the photos which we've already seen throughout this decade, well, in this, we can see some of the characteristics. One is tremendous protagonism of young people who have come front and center. Secondly, tremendous protagonism of creativity and diversity. Each of them have their own little plaque. There's not an organization which centralizes and provides hierarchy or orders this protest. But here we have a tremendous amount of chorality, tremendous amount of diversity carried out by young people, mainly, who have many, many things to say. So we're talking about many, many causes and many different political houses here. In these causes, we know where we want to go. We point out we don't see from where we come. To see, the reason is you're not so much concerned about who mobilizes you, but why you are being mobilized. And of course, this is given over to the protagonism of the great masses in this decade. And we have very transversal, cross-cutting causes, which move hearts, which hit people's consciences and move people to action. This is like these are political causes which are lived and which people really feel. Not only, it's not rational from the point of view of ideology or conceptual, but these are causes which go deep into daily life and which make people really feel these things, that changes begins with them. And so the protagonism of change is individual protagonism. And this choral dimension, this global dimension, of course, is joined to individual protagonism. I believe that these photos where you can see slogans which are not given by any single organization. You see banners, you don't see organizational banners, you don't see slogans or logotypes or images of organizations. These are a good reflection of what I'm talking about, of this choral, what I would call choral protagonism, non-directed, and which is carried out by young people, almost teenagers. As you can see in this line, we're talking here talking about really young people, boys and girls. Now, this activist ecology has also linked into other causes, looking for points of connection, like feminism, for example, or the struggle for equality. These are causes which have become hybrid and crossed over and have maintained bridges of contact in a very significant way. LGBT, equality rights, anti-homophobes, ecology rights, all these have formed part of the rights of immigrants, for example, and they've shown a tremendous capacity to mobilize people thanks to these causes over the past decade. The second point, these political causes, which have been done individually and as a group, particularly by young people, as I said before, well, have generated tremendous social and political activism of a very different ilk, in a very disruptive fashion, with tremendous energy too, mobilizing energy, with capacity to mobilize people. I'd say with tremendous determination to mobilize too, extraordinary in all these aspects. This is a new activism, which has redefined the concept we had before to date of activism, where we combined streets and social networks with a kind of organization. Was an organization on the networks, which is organic, which is global, with a tremendous local impact, but with a global dimension, which was also international, transnational, where creativity and content were given priority over any kind of consideration. Now, this activism has used the new technologies and creativity associated with these technologies. This has given a tremendous capacity to broaden messages with new times of organization, new links between relationships, new non-hierarchical structures, and above all, with a tremendous protagonism on the part of digital and of digital commitment. Some of these, I'm sure that you will remember, users of TikTok, for example, can actually alter and boycott a meeting, for example, of Donald Trump in the last electoral campaign in the US, when a legion of people made various hedge funds lose millions of dollars in Wall Street. All these things, in my mind, have shown a new kind of leadership, not only leadership by seniors. This leadership is not carried out, but they're natural leaderships, of course, which are not strictly chosen by an organization, but they have a moral and exemplary character, a character in which the protagonism itself and exemplarity itself, or the personality of these activists itself, plays an important role. Perhaps it's Greta Thunberg. Of course, Thunberg, of course, is well known, thanks to her commitment. And she still surprises us to see that the first photographs of Greta Thunberg, when she was 16, when she had a placard denouncing climate change, and up to the large demonstrations, including millions of people all over the world.
It's not only Greta Thunberg. Vanessa Nakate is from Uganda. She's one of the main leaders against for climate action in Africa. She took part in COP26. She really is a recognized voice around the world. Another case, Emma Gonzalez. She witnessed a shooting when she was a very young teenager, and she's an activist in the States for gun control. Elizabeth is another example from Kenya. She's one of the most important voices at COP26, and she was capable of presenting a very moving denunciation regarding drought in her country. Now, what do all of these types of activism, which are like teenage activism, what do they have in common? Well, great courage. We're looking at stories of great effort, great activism, with a great deal of commitment and sacrifice. Also in common, they are denunciating all the actions against the climate. They are very audacious. Their speech, their discourse is clear. It's hard-hitting. It's a punching discourse. They talk about causes and not political houses. It's mainly very young women in most cases who are extremely committed. They have a huge amount of energy. They are capable of mobilizing a lot of people, and they want to make the most of resources, visual resources in their mobilizations. So it's here that I'd like to bring up another point, another characteristic or feature of this decade of causes, where in new social and political activism, where artistic language is becoming extremely relevant. Now, why? Well, first of all, because there is a very intimate relation between thought and language and awareness raising or becoming aware. Aristotle said that it also increases the different ways you can look at a problem. You can look at a problem with different languages, and you'll find different solutions and a panoramic view. So we have to broaden our artistic languages so that we can broaden the protagonism, which has been almost exclusively in the past, audiovisual or textual languages. So now we need to broaden, and we are broadening our artistic languages. And I think it's one of the main features of this decade of activism. That is why I wrote the book. It's that combination between activism and artistic languages which bring up or this term, this new concept called artivism. In fact, a large number of organizations are explaining, working and reflecting on all of this and why artistic expression have always been great tools for mobilizations, especially in the States during the pandemic all over the world. And after I explain some of the examples of artivism, I would like to give you my own thoughts. I'd like to share my thoughts with you as to why artistic languages are so efficient, effective in terms of communication. Now, especially dramatic art language, scenic languages, convert our public spaces as they turn them into public theaters, or where our mottos become like a script. And so the whole world becomes a global theater for intervention and mobilization. We have different types of artistic languages, theater, literary language, plastic arts. These are essential in order to mobilize people. I think this is one of the major contributions of artistic languages, and that is why I wrote this book once again. The book highlights 60 experiences around the world. I've selected a few for the talk today. And in the section in my blog, that hashtag Artivism, you'll also find a lot of complementary information, a lot of additional information. Artivision makes protests a creative claim, a creative movement, not only based on fairness, not only based on contents and what people want, these movements want justice, values, ideas, and these activists want all of this to have an artistic dimension. I think this might be useful. Let's look at 14 examples of artivism. This is a photograph, a protest by Extinction Rebellion, one of the most creative groups in the entire world. And we can see these dead sirens here on these steps. This intervention took place in Italy, in Venice in 2021. It was filmed using drones. And I think these mermaids there lying dead on those steps is very impacting, very compelling. Let's look at 5 different activities that I hope might be useful for you. Let's start with performances. Disco disobedience, that is, to dance in a disobedient fashion. It's a very interesting performance. This took place in COP25, which was held in Madrid, and the entire Gran Via, which is the main artery in Madrid, well, it was turned into this civic protest based on dance. It was like a great happening. Given the scarcity of actions by politicians, these young people decided to go out and dance to warn the public in general, the general public, about the impacts of climate change. They have a great deal of resources. In this case, they use dance and music, and they take over public spaces to report and denounce those companies who see business opportunities through greenwashing. As you know, it's a type of makeup, really. One of the main performances, I think you know, 2019, 2020, it had a huge impact globally. 25th of December 2019, a couple of weeks after the social unrest broke out in Chile, well, on the International Day for Eradication of Violence Against Women, these women, this group, designed a very simple choreography with powerful lyrics, very easy to dance to, and this reached all the corners of the world. In fact, there are maps out there published to show the impact of this group around the world. They had a huge sort of impact, very good expression, very powerful music and lyrics. And this is one of the greatest performances that we've seen in this decade. And it's had a global impact and global reach in Turkey, for example. In Parliament, women could only do this protest in Parliament if they did not want to be arrested. So some women, members of Parliament in Parliament, also staged this choreography, showing that the global impact of this very suggestive, very powerful and stimulating performance, and very moving as well. Very interesting pictures. Red Rebels is another choreography. It was enacted in COP26, also by Extinction Rebellion. And this was performed in Glasgow. They were all wearing very large red dresses with non-verbal language, very slow movements. This intervention was supported by teams of experts, choreographers, and other dramatic arts experts, and they were trying to show this sort of performance to highlight the failure of COP26. It was very spectacular. It reminds us of some of the very popular Netflix series. I believe that it was spectacular, one of the most spectacular performances in COP26, trying to show and highlight the necropolis of earlier COP gatherings. Let's move on to another point so that we can broaden our view here, and that is to use objects or installations. This installation is called We Are Being Switched Off. It's in Cañada Real, October 2021. One of the neighborhoods that's very, very close to Madrid, but unfortunately, this neighborhood has, well, it's basically a shanty town with terrible living conditions. So a Brazilian group placed 4,000 rather, candles by that neighborhood, Cañada Real, depicting that sentence, we are being switched off. Look at the plasticity, it's absolutely beautiful. A lot of preparation went into this to make it happen, and I think it's one of the major interventions that we've seen from Voa Mistura. And this gives you an idea of the size of the intervention, the great plasticity of this intervention. Let's move to Belarus now. Again, objects are being used, also color, to demand a political position. It's one of the symbols of rallies in 2020. As you know, the flag of the country is white and red. And when the official authorities banned the exhibition or displaying flags, the people of Belarus, they decided to look at very, very ingenious ways of showing the colors of the flag. This is decentralized creativity with great genius, with great creativity. There were good responses, others rejected it, but this group always tried to surprise the public in a creative manner, to find a way to ensure that the group would be the protagonist, that it would be a global movement, especially when concentrations were being banned in Belarus. And we see the extraordinary group action here. So this is one of the major initiatives that I believe should be highlighted. Let's move on to the third type of language that I wanted to broach, mapping. Again, we go back to Chile, which has been so fruitful in terms of social creativity since 2019 up until the elections. So these are some of the protests in 2019. This is one of the many initiatives of mapping. This banner was displayed in one of the major tall buildings in one of the main squares. It has a very, as you can see, a long strip of the building was used to project messages based on mapping. Here you can see the great visual fortitude of this banner and the impact of that word, dignity, decency, also hunger. And this is the building of a multinational like the Spanish telephone company Telefónica. And every night they would change the mapping, they would change the message. Here, for example, for a new country, another one, democracy. And this is one of the best examples of political mapping that I'm aware of. Still in the language of mapping, and going back to COP26 again, this group wanted to trigger change. And what they did was, here we have the building where COP26 members were gathered, and they projected these massive images with different types of faces, showing diversity, trying to highlight the enormous diversity and the huge differences that there are around the world in terms of climate change. Climate change is linked inextricably to diversity. So very robust messages which were projected on the COP26 venue and other buildings in Glasgow. Now, this is not mapping, but it's as good as mapping. It's a sort of mapping using sunlight to create a language on stage using a camera to project. Here we've got solar mapping. I hope you can see it on the screen. Very spectacular. You see how the message, the letters change, also the concepts change depending on the movement of the sun. I'm going to put it up on the screen for you again because it's, look at the word slow and how the letters change with the movement of the sun. It's absolutely spectacular. This is Pierre Raffol, a French artist. And here's another point. These artistic languages draw inspiration from artists and art, but they're not always being launched or rolled out by an artist, but rather these languages are tuned, they're fine-tuned by non-professional amateur protesters who turn that artistic language in a language for political expression. This is indeed a professional initiative. Pierre Blauer, a great artist, but he has given inspiration for other languages to be created. Now, digital artivism. This is a group from the United Kingdom. I followed them very closely, and they are trying to denounce facial recognition and video surveillance. So they use colors and different shapes and textures. They put them on their faces, they paint their faces to denounce facial recognition and excessive video surveillance. There are many languages and initiatives for digital activism, and they're used a lot in artivism. This, for me, this picture is very surprising, very compelling, and you can see that there is a lot in this image, and I hope this will give you some inspiration. Finally, masks, the carnival, wearing costumes, carnival costumes. I think this is also very important for artivism. Ocean Rebellion. I've also showed you a picture at the very beginning of my presentation. This is a very interesting image, a very interesting picture, looking at the, well, trying to display the idea of a dead sea, given the depletion of the oceans, oil refineries, resources. As you can see, it's a very beautiful image, very powerful. And in COP26, they rolled out some very hard-hitting, very compelling initiatives, very beautiful pictures. You can see they're very dramatic, very compelling. And the idea was to grab the attention of the media so that they could broaden their influence and impact. Here you can see another picture. You can see these masks. They're very, very hard-hitting, very compelling. And I believe that Ocean Rebellion is doing a very good job harnessing drama, the language of drama, to send their political message. Then there is one example I must point out to you, this one here, Baby Trump. I think, well, it was actually displayed in the United Kingdom, in London, when former President Trump visited the UK, and there were huge rallies and protests against Trump. Leo Murray is the artist, and as you all know, this baby Trump has traveled the world. And as you can see it on the screen now. You can see Donald Trump looking quite angry and irate. And you can see here all the media, photographers and activists also taking photographs with their phones.
Has tremendous impact, tremendous visibility, both on land and sea. and India, and ended up in the Museum of London Design Museum, the baby blimp of Trump. Now, Carnival, as I was saying before, this is the playful fiesta. This is the Carnival in Rosenmontag in Germany, which I'm sure you're familiar with. We have this giant blimp of Greta Thunberg denouncing the lack of action of leaders. And we have this tremendous doll, this inflatable doll, which protagonized with others, which are the main attractions of this carnival. Now, carrying on with masks, I'd like to highlight this final initiative called Partygate. This was taken out, there's an initiative by a Mike Matt, a YouTuber, who mobilized 100 people, volunteers, who placed masks to talk about the double standards, to denounce Boris Johnson's double standards. They organized a party outside Downing Street. And to end with a sad party within COP26, because it did go down in history, not because of its results, but because of the plastic element. Here we have an orchestra is out of tune, where world leaders cannot play a single song together. They're all out of tune. This is an action carried out in the street, thought up by the media, and had a tremendous amount of impact. And to conclude, therefore, what, to my opinion, are the characteristics of Artivism? These, well, 5 maybe. One is festival, it's entertaining, it's funny. It aims, of course, to make people laugh creatively, a sort of while denouncing. Dariafo, the Italian playwright, said that laughter is the power of the people who do not have power, that laughing at powerful people is what's been done by the powerless throughout history. And so, where people are courageous, they are daring, we have a contagious laugh, a laugh which, of course, is very subversive too. The second one is choral, C-H-O-R-A-L, as well as amateur. This is a chorus. We don't have artists as protagonists, but by many people who use art's language. It's also a choir in which everyone is a protagonist. And there are many, many initiatives in which you can do your own thing, so to speak. You can do an activity on your own, but you can also participate in people in a choir. It's choir-like because it's on and off, it's digital, and it's physical too. Right? Streets to networks and networks to street. It's hybrid, many different formats, many languages. It's imperfect as well as hybrid. It uses technology, of course, to come up with data to set up initiatives and relationships. And finally, we have a global dimension, both global and local at the same time. Now, to my mind, if we want to change the world, if you want to improve it, at least by making it more sustainable and fairer, you need irreversible changes and basic changes. And artistic languages may be catalysts here and bring together and merge these different energies. The art has this capacity to move people, and it's a motive. This is related to emotions, with values, with conscience. It also means that we can move too. And moving is related to action, community, ideas, media, and politics. And so, if you want to move, and in all its senses, this is the word you need to use. I hope that my little presentation has been stimulating for you, it's been pleasant, and now I'm waiting for your questions. And I certainly hope to share the document I've used in my presentation and the chapter which I mentioned, which I managed to have released by the editorial, by the publishing house, for you to have time to read it. And if you want to buy the book, to buy it. Of course, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that I have fulfilled your expectations. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much indeed, Antoni Gutiérrez Rubí. A real fantastic, inspiring lecture. Now I'd like to invite you to share via the chat, to share your thoughts, your questions, your thoughts, your opinions, your comments. I see Flor, who's a colleague of mine. I work with her on activism. We've chapter 3 is on the chat, by the way. We've also posted on the chat a document so that you can have certain amount of resources. And I had promised to you chapter presentation and resources, and the presentation has been given to the Institute and they will share it with you. So I'm entirely at your disposal for questions. Now okay, if you agree, we are going to translate this into English. If it's okay with you, yes? Okay, so you can all have access to it. So please send me the translation. I can have the version in English too, of course, says Bettina. Okay, first reaction, very interesting. Thank you very much for this chat. It seems to me that what I like most is that how you the things between what is living and what is amateur, because I expecting something which should anyone can get a group together, activists, although what we've seen also requires a certain amount of technical resources to carry out the mappings you mentioned. You need technical resources to do this, of course, but you've also shown many things which can be done with very few resources, and which is of great interest to us in our project. Since you are all in your different countries, coming to an end of your campaigns, how can we create small events, small actions, which can be filmed in situ and to be put into your campaigns and to communicate via social networks? How can we do this? Well, while we are giving people time to ask questions, if not, we could end the session here. This idea you've mentioned, which I talked about, of using the public space, using public space as a canvas and as a stage, to understand public space as a place which you can bring on board to your own protest, use it to stage your own protest. The use of public space as a visual metaphor, as a stage management event. All of a sudden, a simple chair, for example, simple stairs will enable us to do something extraordinary. I remember something which was done a couple of years ago by a Brazilian group, and they wanted to talk about climate change and the thawing of the Arctic and the Antarctic. What they put some small figures on stairs. They were ice figures, and they gradually melted, and they ended up at the bottom of the stairs as a pool of water. So they used the stairs as a stage, and it had tremendous potential. I would recommend, when thinking about artivists, go to the theater if you want ideas. Look at the operas. Go to the opera theaters or watch them on YouTube. This will give you a great many ideas. This will give you scenography, contemporary scenography, because the street, public space, the street, the square, is has tremendous plasticity and is inspirational, because simply with a small event on your public area, all of a sudden, these stairs become a tremendous visual metaphor. So, seems to me very important. It's a question here, I think, from Adrià Cisternes. Let's have a look at it. Thanks, Agustí. Thanks, Ornella. Thanks, Diana. Let's look at the questions. Ornella says, recommend Mora Verón. Would you? I know these activists in Argentina. I would recommend their events. And respect the question by Adriana. She talked about a communication agency in Sweden, which did a happening with balloons. Okay. Yeah, true. Many advertising agencies are practicing called guerrilla marketing, which makes professional use of the techniques, so to speak, of artistic language to have marketing inserts, so marketing very spectacular, very creative guerrilla inserts, in this case in favor of companies, of course, or using other techniques to defend an idea or a proposal. Now, guerrilla marketing and committed publicist is a good way to work forward, of course, but unlike the guerrilla marketing, which is done in a very professional way, what I am interested in Artism is the amateur and non-professional nature of it. The idea that they're not produced, quote unquote. It's not a professional job, so to speak, to get a specific result of communication by the object, but rather it's a way of living the political idea. Okay? The guerrilla marketing means makes you an onlooker. It's attractive, certainly, even very seductive, but Artism is not, you are not a spectator, you are a participant. And you participate with your body. You participate too with your energies and with the energy of others too. So you are not an onlooker, you're not a spectator. Artism makes you a protagonist, makes you an actor, where you are the protagonist of the action, and this artistic language runs through you, not only to be admired, but goes through you and moves you. When young people paint themselves, for example, they're not only achieving a tremendous impact, the visual impact on the part of other people, but this is a process of personal transformation, of personal mutation, of a change, personal change. So it's art which pierces you, which transforms you, which moves you emotionally, which makes you into something which cannot, not only observable, but which is related to your awareness and which is related to the fact that you are taking action. This is the important aspect, it seems to me. Adria, yeah, the teddy bears. This thing about the teddy bears is in the book, by the way. There are many bombardments of teddy bears. In this case, I think it was Belarus here too. Yeah, Belarus, where a team of artivists really got through the Belarus military parade, and they bombarded that military parade with teddy bears. Very courageous, tremendous personal risk, but the idea is, it's a comic idea of provoking the military, of a playful approach, and you challenge the established power by laughing at it. I believe that this is the route forwards which we could use. Veronica asked me whether these protests are easy to carry out without needing government authorization, for example, or local authorization of response. Well, I must say that you're on the limit. You're in a gray area of authorized, no authorized, allowed, not allowed, regulated, non-regulated. You're on the cusp, so to speak. It's in this frontier, this limit, this sort of border, so to speak, where this is where this is the interesting part when it comes up with political denunciation, because these limits are related to limitations, your own freedom of expression, freedom of meeting, freedom of movement. So there too is an opportunity to do things. Anto Carabelli asks, well, yes, I do believe that they're tremendous, have an impact on governments and people because of something which we haven't underlined sufficiently. These activists, these protests, in which people who form part of this group are protagonists, go viral, always. They have natural, organic, viral nature because many of the people who participate are filming the process itself, in which people paint themselves in this meeting or whatever. And so the technology and social networks act as a sort of a testimony, graphic and audiovisual testimony of the activity. And so these do go viral. You can do something with 10 people, but of course it reaches hundreds of thousands of people thanks to the viral nature of technology. The second point, because they have this, the idea of creative denunciation, it's surprising that it does not look like a political party's banner or a trade union. As language, artistic language, it can go above and beyond this. And so this means that it has tremendous echo in the media, in the formal media. So you can find yourself in a situation in which the opening of a newspaper, a digital, we have the headline of we have the headline of a political party, but the photograph is a denunciation of the people using artistic language, as happened in COP26. So this is an interesting thing, that the viral nature and production of artistic language is related to the fact that these protagonists make it into a sort of personal testimony of their activity, and the media, the communication media pick it up. Hannah, I hope I got the pronunciation right. Importance of... Okay, so it's the idea that artivism, this idea of streets to the network to the streets, and the idea of social networks as a physical space, not only a digital space. This is important too, where you can carry out digital, very interesting digital experiments. This is very suggestive and very interesting. There's a link, I can put a link here in the chat for everyone to see. And it seems to me that we need to think long and hard about the digital dimension of what you're going to do. Sorry, Antoni, to interrupt. You're talking to the project of Olafur and Yeltsin, which is called Earth Speaker. Is that what you're talking about? Yes, I am. Yes, indeed. Earth Pika, I think it's called in English. Now, one good idea, one good clue I could give you is that many artivist projects, well, the important thing here is not the end, the action itself, but the work in progress, the making of, so to speak. Looking for the social networks, looking for the plastic bottles which you're going to make these masks with. This kind of creative itinerary where we are going to prepare the action, to prepare it technically, creatively, but also politically from the medial point of view and from the social point of view. These forms part of the process itself.
So I think it's really interesting to note how technology can help us to do a making of, and step by step, behind the scenes, not in a theater, but behind the scenes of social rallying, activism and artivism. This allows us to ensure that rallies, mobilization will be much more robust. And then if you do good work in digital artivism or activism, all of those contents will become digital objects that we can share, that we can transfer, that we can package, that we can fine tune and adapt to our own context or situation. So artivism generates a lot of imagery, a lot of choreography, and there is great potential, and all of that is material that can be used. So thank you very much, Hannah, for raising this issue. Let's remember, all of that is material that we can use, and it's really useful if we want to look at a more creative dimension in artivism. Yes, that's very interesting, a very important clue for campaigns. I think it's important to look at both aspects. On the one hand, the action, the intervention itself, and then secondly, as Antoni said, using digital material to present the claim or the denunciation. Most of your campaigns are digital, aren't they? So perhaps we'd need two teams, one to do the performance or to act, another team filming the intervention, and then to think about how to use the pictures, the images, or the recordings for the campaigns. I'm going to draw something for you so that you can get a clearer idea of what I'm saying. So artivism campaigns, can you see the picture? Well, this drawing, this here, the slope, that's all the time needed for preparation. And in the prepping stage, you can create a lot of content. After the intervention, you see this line here. This represents contents that can be, shared. Artivism does leave a digital footprint, a digital trace. So it's not only important at the time of rolling out the intervention. If we document this properly, then there will be a trace, there will be a digital footprint, which will be very fruitful, and it'll be like a comet with a long tail, meaning that you can use that content for later or subsequent interventions. So we need to find images that can be linked to ideas, to protest, to denunciation. That is really important. I can't highlight it enough.
¿Tenéis más preguntas?
Are there any more questions? More questions, anyone? Well, if there aren't, then I can leave you here then. I'm sure that a lot of people now, all the people attending, are thinking about future steps. Yes, I'm sure. In my website and the document that you'll see at the top of the chat that Flor shared, you'll see all the resources, the toolkit. Do read that chapter 3, which has been released by the publishers. If you can buy the book, that would be great. And especially contaminate, quote unquote, contaminate yourselves in a good way. Let's see some contagion here with creative initiatives. Let's try and look for hybrid initiatives. Don't try to seek perfection. The idea is to do this sort of permanent work in progress. That's the attitude. So shared perfection, forget perfection because you are not professionals, but you can be extremely efficient in communication by applying arts, languages in a very liberating manner, a very creative manner, and giving a great deal of inspiration. That's why I like to use the Spanish word conmover, which is to move consciences. So I hope this presentation was useful. Yes, I'm looking at the chat here. A number of people are saying, Antoni, thank you so much. You have now left us recalculating how we can roll all of this out in practice. Beautiful presentation. I think it's been perfect to prepare ourselves for action. As we've seen in some of those videos or pictures that you've shown, it's so easy to use a mask, a bit of makeup or paint to really create something that will grab people's attention. And then, of course, if you can record all of that and document it, it can be edited and you can make it even, the message can be made even more robust and moving. It's all a case of trial and error. If it doesn't work the first time, try it once again, edit the material, don't throw it out. Yes, you have to go to the cinema, the theater, you have to go to the opera, you have to go to dance performances, ballet, drama, and theater. You have to really focus on all of these artistic expressions so that you can nurture your minds. So I'll leave it here then, and thank you once again, Goethe-Institut, for inviting me. Yes, thank you, Antoni. Thank you for joining us. And I invite everyone present to learn and to put into practice some sort of intervention so that we can delve deeper into artivism. There's a workshop by John Peters. He's one of the founding members of Art for Action in Germany called PEN. And in that seminar or workshop, you can learn an experience of the making of. It's going to be very interesting. So we'll be able to bring together the panoramic view that Antoni Gutierrez Rubi has given us, and also the sort of micro approach from this group. And we hope that all of these examples will help you in your campaign. Thank you so much, Antoni, for being such a great source of inspiration with your lecture today. Thank you, and see you next time. Good luck, everyone.